get our town hall going.
Hello, good evening, everyone. I'm looking forward to a great discussion that we're having today. I will tell you that we are looking forward to keeping everybody informed about their power. We're going to wait for people to come on. I know some people are saying they just got the link, so we will give a couple minutes and then we will get started. And we have a great discussion today. So we want to thank everybody who's coming in to have this great discussion. And we have a lot to talk about. So we're going to jump into a couple minutes, but I'm going to start off by discussing why we had this event and making people understand why this is so important. We are facing an energy crisis for the first time. Many people, even a couple years ago, even 5 years ago, didn't suspect that this would happen. But I will say this, we do have Jason from PJM who is going to talk about that they had warned about this for years. But basically, we are electrifying everything from new homes are all electric. We're driving electric cars. We're doing everything electric, which requires, and I just want to, electricity, more strain on our grid. In addition, we have about 181 data centers in Loudoun County, another 50 that will be total in Prince William, and you name it. We have more data centers coming in Frederick, Montgomery County, and that's just within our region. What I didn't know until I became a council member is that we are on a 13 state consortium. And the 13 state consortium, that means that we draw power in the same place that Virginia draws power, that Pennsylvania draws power. And the reality is that the sources of power that we have are limited for the demand. So if the state of Maryland does not act, they say we could be at risk of seeing a an increase in not only our electricity bills but possible blackouts, and that is something we do not want to see. So we are definitely looking forward to a great discussion today. And the purpose of this, and I've gotten this from the media, why are you doing this? Information is power. And at this point, one of the things I did not know before I became a council member is this type of information. And now I feel that I must provide my community with the same access to information. And I only found this out when I started looking into the fact that we had all these companies interested in bringing data centers to Prince George's County. That's when I started looking at it. And I said, wait, this is huge. We do need to know how why our rates are going up. 10 years in 10 years, they say we had the coldest winter in 10 years, and we saw record high energy bills. Why is that? Well, the limited number of power has a lot to do with that. And the reality is that if we don't do something, we fear that the increase would only expedite, which would mean that people would not be able to afford to pay their bills. And right now, we have people who are on payment plans that they cannot afford. And so we do know, and we will understand this is series one of many. We are going to have state of powers maybe every month or every 2 months. The next one group that we are bringing is utility. So this is series one. But I do feel that, and I said I pride myself that we have a very educated district. We even have people that are probably on this call that can explain it better than I can. But the reality is that something must be done. So we are looking to move towards the state to ask them for what they're going to do. But what we want to do is put our residents in charge of the information. Let them know what is at risk. So we thank you all so much for coming out for hearing. We are going to hear first from PJM. We have Jason Stanek, who is the executive director of the PJM, and he is going to start first, and he is going to really break it down. And I ask you to please listen. And we know everyone can't be on tonight, so we ask you to. We are streaming this on YouTube also, so that people can also tap in on YouTube. But this is essential because this is really where your power comes from, and that's really, really important. And we want people to know about that. And then We have Brittany Baker with the Climate Action Network, which is going to talk about, which is going to break it down even more to the form where you can understand. And I would say for many of us, I myself as a lawyer had a very difficult time understanding something so technical. So we do need those who can break it down for us and make sure that we know. So the format is going to be the presentations first, and we've asked them to take no more than 15 minutes. We know that's a long time, but the reality is that we need the information. And then we're going to do question and answer. Now, what we ask you to do is to put if you will see a question and ask function, start putting your questions in the chat. And we have staff members here who are watching and who will read the questions out to everybody. So that will be the best way so that we can do it, so that we can make sure that we get the questions now. So we don't have open questions. We're going to be answering the questions for each panelist, and then we will close up. If you have any follow-up questions, we do encourage you to reach out to our office, and we will make sure that we can get the questions answered. So I want to turn it over and starting off with Jason. And I want to thank Jason because Jason not only works for PJM, but he actually lives in Prince George's County. So it is nice to have a Prince Georgian that can break it down to his neighbors. And as many are coming on, we do ask that you take notes, listen in, and let's talk about it. As we talk about data center, remember, you're going to learn from this. A data center that goes up in Loudoun County, in Frederick County, still impacts our bills here in Prince George's County. And Jason, I'm going to turn it over to you you can get us started so we can get this conversation going.
Great. Well, thank you. Good evening. Really appreciate Councilmember Bouguet and her team for bringing this issue to the forefront. Folks are wondering why their utility bills are increasing, but they don't often know the reason. So we'll touch on some of these topics over the next 15 minutes while I go through a presentation. But the larger picture is the state of energy in Maryland is dire. And I've explained this to the legislature in Annapolis earlier this year. And the organization that I work for, PJM, has been on record for several years now that we're beginning to experience a bit of an energy crisis. If we could just advance the slides, if we could bring them up. And I can't see them if they're up, but they may be. Oh, here we go. Thank you, Nadia. So there is record strain on the grid, and the grid is very large. It serves 67 million people in the Mid-Atlantic. And I always like to start with just an easy diagram of what the grid looks like. PJM is the grid operator. You may have never heard of PJM before because you only get a bill typically from PEPCO in District 6. But PJM from our headquarters in Valley Forge, Pennsylvania, operates the high voltage transmission system, which you see in those teal high transmission towers. On the right side of the screen, you'll see yellow transmission lines, and those are called distribution lines, and those are operated by PEPCO or your local utility. And then we have lots of types of generation. You have nuclear at the top, you have hydroelectric on the left-hand side. But PJM is responsible for orchestrating the movement of electrons from the source of production to the ultimate end user, yourself. So I'd just like to show that to sort of set the stage and show where PJM is. If we move to the next slide here, you'll see this is where I work out of. This is the control room where we have dispatchers sitting at desks 24/7. We have a large footprint that spans 13 states and the District of Columbia. So from Maryland to North Carolina, from Illinois to New Jersey, it's a very large service territory that we cover. So those men and women that you see sitting at the desks, they're in contact with PEPCO and many other utilities to ensure that the grid is in a state of good health and that we can keep the power on 24/7. At the end of the day, our job is to ensure that the electricity stays on for you and your families. The next photo here, next slide, please, shows you where PJM sits in the Eastern Interconnection. PJM is the darker blue shaded area that includes Maryland. And we are a nonprofit. We have been charged by the federal government to operate the grid in these states. You'll see some key statistics on the left-hand side. We have about 165 megawatts of peak load. We also have a square miles of service territory, about 370,000 square miles. And we operate about 88,000 miles of high voltage transmission lines. In the next slide, you'll see Maryland. If we could advance one slide, thank you. Your first sort of reaction may be there's not a lot of transmission lines in Maryland, and that is true. The red lines you see on the map here indicate 500 kilovolt transmission lines. So you may see some of these as you're driving up and down I-95, but typically they were developed to serve some of the large nuclear plants like Calvert Cliff. In Prince George's County, we used to have Chalk Point, which was a coal plant that was decommissioned. But you'll notice that there's not a lot of high voltage transmission lines on the Eastern Shore, as well as the panhandle of Maryland. Building any type of energy infrastructure is very challenging. Nobody wants a transmission line in their backyard. Nobody wants a coal plant or a natural gas plant. Or in many cases, we see opposition for wind turbines off of Ocean City, Maryland. So building any type of energy infrastructure has been a challenge in a relatively dense state such as ours. So whether you live in Forestville or District Heights, Upper Marlboro, or other points in the district, we see these concerns. So let's move on to the next slide, and I'll show you something that's rather dramatic here. And let me explain what you're looking at here. Every year, as the grid operator, PJM predicts what demand will look like in the future. And we label a new trend line with the year. So as you can see, in 2016, 2017, through 2023, our projected demand for electricity was relatively flat. And then you notice, starting in 2024, it jumped substantially. And then in 2025, it jumped even higher. And on the left side, you'll see on the y-axis, we have electric load, which is demand, increasing from around 150,000 megawatts to a high of about 220 megawatts. The problem that we're seeing is that forecasted demand for electricity continues to climb at record highs. When we create a new trend line in 2026, next month in January, I suspect that trend line will be considerably higher than the dotted line for 2025. And as you are well aware, for any commodity, when there's an increase in demand and not a corresponding increase in supply, prices for the commodity goes up, whether it be coffee beans or avocados. The same principles, economic 101 principles, hold true for electricity as well. If we could forward to the next slide, we'll see some of the reasons. And one of the reasons is the explosive growth of data centers. And we'll talk about data centers in a moment, but these were just two cover pages of the Washington Post and the New York Times. The Washington Post saying, amid explosive demand, America is running out of power. And then the New York Times had a quote, a new surge in power use is threatening U.S. climate goals. And while data centers is a large driver for that increase in demand for electricity, there are other also increases as more people drive electric cars, as more buildings convert from natural gas to electrification for their power needs, their heating needs, their cooling needs. We're using a lot more electricity than we did just a few years ago. If we move forward to the next slide, you may have heard that Northern Virginia is the global capital for the internet traffic and data centers. And there's a picture of a data center on the right-hand side. And As you can see, Virginia has many of them, as indicated by the dots on the screen there. Maryland has data centers, but they're relatively small in comparison to some of these large data centers that we are seeing develop in Northern Virginia. And you may ask yourself, what is a data center? Well, it's a building. It's a large building, like the size of a Costco warehouse, sometimes even larger than that. And if you have the opportunity to walk into one, you'll see that there are aisles and aisles and racks of computer servers as far as the eye can see. And there's a hot side and a cold side, because these computers are generating a tremendous amount of heat, and the chips need to be cooled by air conditioning, along with increased consumption of water. And you ask yourself, well, why are all these computers needed? And simply, data centers are now running large swaths of our economy, and data centers are key to economic development. If you're using a phone, or if you're using this Zoom that we're on tonight, it's likely being routed through a data center in Northern Virginia. So whether you're shopping for a Christmas gift on Amazon, or you're doing your banking, or looking at TikToks, that all uses a tremendous amount of power. What's happened more recently is that there's been explosive development and use of artificial intelligence. You may use ChatGPT, you may use some of the AI-enabled features in Google, and that uses a lot of power. And I'd be happy to answer questions about data centers as we go forward this evening. On the next slide, if we could advance one, it shows you that we're a relatively small state. Many of our fossil-fueled power plants have retired. In fact, almost all of our coal plants in Maryland have retired. And that's a good thing for emissions reduction. Plenty of tailpipe level emissions, CO2 and otherwise nitrous oxide and many others that contribute to greenhouse gases are associated with fossil and thermal generation. And if you ask yourself, how often do you see power plants in Maryland? You might not see them that often, because we don't have many left in the state. In fact, 40% of our daily electricity is imported from other states. So an electron that was possibly generated in Pennsylvania or West Virginia may actually make its way to your home and consumed by you when you turn on your microwave oven or charge your phone. And this has been a situation in Maryland for some time. In that blue box on the right, you'll see that since 2018, Maryland has retired approximately 6,000 megawatts of power plants. But we've only added about 1,600 megawatts during that same time. And the new additions are typically of a different type. We're not replacing coal with coal, but we're replacing coal with largely solar projects. And obviously, when you're retiring more units than you're bringing on, you're going to end up with a shortfall at some point. And this supply-demand imbalance that we're seeing is contributing to the increased price of capacity for electricity. And that will make its way onto your Pepco bill for constituents and residents of District 3. On the next slide, I'd just like to show you, this is what we're talking about here. We're talking about your utility bill. So if we could advance just one. And so this is an anatomy of electric utility bill. This is an actual Pepco bill that I'd like to share with you. You can see in the bottom right corner, the total bill for this month was $332. And I'd like to just walk through the bill and go through some of the components. On the left side, we have distribution services that Pepco charges for. And you'll see a number of items that are all regulated by the Maryland Public Service Commission, which I used to work for. So the state has regulatory responsibility for everything on the left side. So you'll see a customer charge, which is a fixed rate that doesn't change throughout the year. You'll see an energy charge, $136 there. That is to support Pepco and their distribution services. So everything from the Pepco's trucks to the wooden poles to repairing those poles and wires, that is recovered by that fee there. Below that, you have some various taxes, franchise tax, universal service charge. In this situation, the customer here received a credit of $32 for participating in a program. As we go down forward, you'll see Empower Maryland is $19. That's an energy efficiency program required by the state. So Pepco puts that line item on the bill as a courtesy for the state. And then you'll see a Prince George's County tax and another credit on the left side. On the right side, we have supply charges. And those charges are very, very different. Pepco effectively just includes these on the bill, but these amounts don't go to Pepco. They go to others that provide the service. So you'll see there's a transmission services charge there. That goes to the owner of the lines that operate and own those high voltage transmission lines. So that's about $27, $28. And then generation services. This is the actual electricity that you consume in your home, $148. So I just want to make clear that the big number on the left side, $136, that's the distribution charge that you pay Pepco to maintain their utility service to your home or residence. But the actual amount of electricity that you're consuming is on the right side, on the generation. So whoever is actually generating from their power plant or their solar farm or their wind turbine, they will receive that $148. And that's actually a blended number, which includes the commodity itself, as well as something called capacity, which is effectively a payment that we pay generators to ensure that they're available and ready to supply in the future. So you add up all those numbers, and it's about $332. This was a bill that was, I believe, in July or August of this past year. So there's lots of pressure right now. I recognize affordability is a concern for many of my fellow Prince Georgians, whether it be health insurance, whether it be groceries or housing costs. We're seeing upward pressure. But for utility bills in particular, it goes back to the economic fundamentals of we don't have enough supply on the system and demand is increasing at a historic rate. I'll just leave you with this. PJM has been in business now for almost 100 years. We're about 99 years old. This year alone, we've hit a number of records. We had our highest winter peaking day earlier this year in January, and 3 of our top 10 highest and hottest summer days were this year. 3 of the top 10, as well as the highest winter peak. So the facts are not in controversy right now. The grid is under strain, and we are doing our best out of our control room to figure out ways to keep the lights on 24/7, at the same time ensuring that utility rates are affordable. So I'll look forward to the conversation this evening with my fellow presenter, and then happy to take any questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you so much. I do have a couple of questions, and I want to start off first. We do have some questions and a thing, but they're very detailed. And I would say I would give kudos to Prince George's County because some people came with information. But let's start off with this. I did want to note now there's a difference in the bill if people notice that not every part of the bill of your bill is all usage. So Jason, can you do a breakdown of what percentage is just distribution with the utility, so Pepco, and what does the distribution entail? So what are we paying for? Because that bill, it was 136, I believe. Can we put the bill back up?
Yeah, that bill 136 for distribution, it was almost about half on that bill.
Okay, so is that, and so what I will say is that that's something that was news to me. I did not know this. I want people to know half of your bill is distribution, so it doesn't have anything to do. So is the distribution side, this 136. So if you have a 300 bill, about 50% of it is distribution. Now, what does that cost include? So does that have anything to do with usage?
So many, actually, you'll see under that middle column, it says how we calculate this charge. You'll see the charge is many of the charges are based on a volumetric amount. So you'll see this customer used 1,429 kilowatt hours. So obviously, the more you use, the more you'll pay. That first charge, though, the customer charge, $8.44, every residential Pepco customer, whether you use a lot or use a little, everybody will, if you take a look at your bill at home, it'll say $8.44. I guarantee you that. Anything that has the kilowatt hour number, in this case, it's 1429, that's a volumetric charge. So this customer used that much in terms of electricity. And then there's a multiplier, as you could see, for each of those items. And then you multiply that number by your usage and you get the amount. But the distribution services, all those line items on the left side are regulated fully by the Maryland Public Service Commission. If Pepco wishes to change any of these rates, they need to get approval from the state's utility regulator. Whereas the charges on the right-hand side of the bill are not regulated by the state. So this is the interstate high voltage transmission lines under transmission services. And then the generation services, you can see that's what, $148.57. That goes to pay for the owner of the power plant that generated the electricity that you consumed. I hope that helps.
I got on mute. Okay. And I will tell you all that will be the next. I do see Pepco in the chat. We will, the next meeting we have will be with the utility. So they will break that. But I just wanted people to know that your bill is broken up into two. So it looks like with this bill is about 50-50. So one half of the bill is the utility, the other half is transmission usage. So you understand that, because I did not know that coming in. Now, there's a lot of talk in the chat about solar. So can you explain how solar plays a part of this, and what, and because can solar sort of offset the high costs, and can you kind of go into that?
Adding new generation to our grid and to our state will help alleviate the supply and demand imbalance. Solar obviously doesn't require any fuel except for sun, and the sun is free. The problem that we're seeing in the state of Maryland is that we don't have a tremendous amount of solar development. We've seen a number of localities and municipalities frustrate the ability of solar developers to actually build large utility scale solar. I've experienced that many folks in agriculturally sensitive areas don't want to build large solar arrays. Others don't want forests cut down to install solar panels as well. So in the state of Maryland, we do have an aggressive laws on the books and goals to get solar, more solar development enacted. It's just been relatively slow to roll out here in Maryland.
Now, if we had solar farms, how much would that offset the need of building a transmission or a power plant?
That's a great question. You need either more transmission lines or more generation. Ideally, you would have a nice mix of both. But if you don't want to build big transmission lines to your neighborhood, then you need more supply generation. So it could be more solar panels closer to where the electricity will be consumed. So that would make more sense. If you build a power plant next to your home, you don't need long transmission lines because it has to go a shorter distance. And Maryland has been a long supporter of solar development in the state. We just need more of it, and we need more of it developed quickly.
Okay, and just to clarify with the solar, if like what is there any other jurisdiction that has solar in a way that's offsetting their need for power generation? Is there any other jurisdiction? And Brittany, you have that information or something? Because I think if you have that, we'll keep that. But do you know, Jason, of any other state?
I'm not aware of any other state that could offset the need for new high voltage transmission with that amount of solar. You would need large amounts of acreage of solar panels to develop.
Got it. Okay. And then the next part is that the big concern of data centers, one thing that's been clear, and we know this, and so most people in our area are aware of this, data centers has always been in this area. It's always been on the grid. So what is the difference with data centers? Because if data centers has already been around, and frankly, a lot of new ones have just recently come on, but it's not like they've spiked in 1 year. Why would data centers impact the usage?
That's a great question. We've had dozens of data centers for decades operating up and down the 95 corridor between Washington and Baltimore. However, the data centers of today are not like the ones of just a couple of years ago. We actually call them hyperscalers now. They're much larger. They use a tremendous amount more of electricity than the older data centers used. The large developers are household names that we know, Google, Meta, Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft. They are competing with each other, and artificial intelligence is a large driver. Obviously, we weren't using AI 2 years ago, but everybody's using it now. And many of these data centers use the equivalent amount of electricity as medium-sized cities.
Got it. Okay, so it's the type of data centers that have been built in the last couple years. Okay, so that's good for people to know because I actually had that big question. I was like, what's the difference if we've always had data centers? So then that's good. So is there any, because of course this has been something that I've been pushing, and of course some people in the chat have pushed this. Is there any, has there been any place where they required the data center to bring their own generation so that they would not come on the grid that everybody is using? Is that something that has been practiced? Is that something that's practical? Because that's something that people have asked.
Yes, we call that BYOG, bring your own generation. Some data centers currently have diesel backups. So they have emergency diesel backup generators. Obviously, diesel contributes to air quality emissions. So you would like to limit that as much as possible. The problem is we have a mismatch in timing. You could build a new data center in about 18 months, but if you needed to build a new power plant, let's say a natural gas plant, it's going to take 6 or 7 years due to supply chain issues. So we're seeing these data centers multiply very quickly, but it's very slow to bring new power generation online. That's the conundrum we're facing right now.
Okay. And do you know, and I think that some people would say that does a data center pay any more money for usage since we're all on the same grid? Are they paying more?
So every class of customers pay a different rate. So typically Pepco has residential customers, commercial customers, and industrial customers. However, these large hyperscaler data centers are in a class by themselves at this point. So we leave it to the federal and state utility regulators, such as the Public Service Commission, to determine what the rate classes are and how to allocate, they call it rate design, how to allocate the costs of the utilities amongst the varying rate classes. So it is likely and possible that these large data centers will pay more.
Okay, but the question is, even with the data center, does it still have an impact on the bills of the consumers?
Yes, they might very well, because when you have a data center, obviously it's going to use a lot of supply. You may need to build new infrastructure to serve those customers. And traditionally, many of those costs of developing new electric power generation are socialized amongst customers in all rate classes. Obviously, that varies by utility service territory and by state, depending on their laws and regulations. But there are side effects where other customers could be adversely impacted and see an increase in their utility bills.
Okay. And let me just ask this. What have been the efforts to build a power plant? Are you basically your whole presentation is we need another power plant?
Additional generation in the state would help alleviate the situation. At PJM, we don't have any authority to direct the construction of new power plants. We can direct the construction of new transmission power lines. So the question is, who's responsible for power plant generation in the state? And that is the state of Maryland. At the end of the day, the state is responsible for what we call resource adequacy, making sure that the residents of the state have enough adequate generation of electricity to meet the needs of the citizens of that state.
Okay. And let me just say this. So just to clarify, just to bring it a little home, so people now understand that they're saying power generation. Do you know of any projects where they're trying to bring more power that's coming up in the next, year or two?
We don't have any major power plants under construction right now in Maryland. There were attempts to build large offshore wind turbines off of the coast of Ocean City. However, recent actions by the current administration in Washington will frustrate some of that development. That was initially set to bring in about 8,000 megawatts of offshore wind power. You're not going to find many places in the country where new coal generation will be developed. It would be exceedingly difficult, I believe, to build natural gas plants in the state of Maryland. So then what are we looking at? We're looking at solar, we're looking at wind, and we're looking at battery storage technologies that could effectively store the output of renewable and clean resources during the day or when the wind's blowing, and then share them at times that we need the battery to discharge.
And that would be a last question because I know we need to move on to the next speaker. So I just want to make sure because I'm going through some of the questions of what was put out there. When we had the Qualified Data Center Task Force meeting, you mentioned that if something isn't done, then we would be looking at possible blackouts in 2027. Can you explain that?
That's right. We have a lot of engineers, electrical engineers on staff and professional transmission planners. And we have determined that by the middle of 2027, June of 2027, we could see the potential for voltage collapse in the state of Maryland. And what does that mean? That means that we may not be able to effectively stabilize the grid, and that could result in service interruptions. It could result in power outages. And hence, we need to build new high voltage transmission lines in the state. We do have some developers that are attempting to build these lines. We recognize that, of course, anybody who will be living near the lines are typically, you don't want that type of infrastructure in your backyard or within your the view of the front living room. But the fact of the matter is we're using more electricity in the state and in the region, and something will either give. Either we build more generation, we build more transmission towers, or we'll face some of the consequences of failing to invest in the state's energy infrastructure.
Okay. And is there any plans that has anybody communicated with you from the state of Maryland, any plans to address this issue?
We are working with our partners, both in Annapolis as well as some of the other agencies, to ensure that this infrastructure gets built. But of course, we're on the doorstep of 2026, and June of 2027 is only 18 months away. So we do need to move with speed in order to build some of these transmission lines.
And are the bills in Virginia going through the same issue since they're the cause of some of the cause of our problems? Are they going through the same increase in electricity rates as we are?
Yes, many of the states that we operate in are seeing increases in their utility bills. The largest utility that serves most of Virginia, called Dominion Energy, they are seeing upward pressure on their bills. I would say when you look at our control room, there are no state lines listed on those maps on the wall, and it's easy for us in Maryland to sort of blame Virginia for increased development of data centers.
They are to blame, but okay.
Well,
right.
But if you speak to our friends in Pennsylvania, they point to Maryland oftentimes as saying we have to effectively shoulder the burdens of Maryland by exporting our power to keep Maryland afloat. So you have states pointing their fingers at each other, and if we focus on solutions, I think states could help each other because we are electrically connected. At the end of the day, it's one big machine.
And when they're exporting, make sure that is clear for the state. How much are we exporting our power generation versus being the power generation of the grid?
We in Maryland don't export any of our electricity. We are what is called a net importer. So currently, we only generate, on average, about 60% of our needs on a daily basis. So that means that on an average day, we have to import 40% of our electricity from our neighbors.
Okay, and just people understand that as he said, if we had to cover the power for the state of Maryland within the state of Maryland, only 60% of the power would be covered. So we do reach out to the grid, which includes Pennsylvania, which probably does Pennsylvania have the highest number of power generation in the grid, on the grid?
Yes, of the 13 states, they are the largest net exporter. Other states include Indiana, West Virginia, where they produce more power than they could use. So they export it to us. We're the opposite. We use more than we produce. So at the end of the day, being a part of a market is a collective. Sometimes you take, sometimes you give, but it helps to ensure 24/7 reliability.
Okay, so I've asked a lot of questions. I think we've covered most of them. Brittany, I'm going to turn it over to you. And Jason, we just, stand by if anything comes up. But Brittany, you've seen where we've gone with our presentation. So we'll turn it over to you to bring it down to the residents so they can understand some things. And then we will ask Brittany some follow-up questions.
Sounds great. Thank you so much. I appreciate you again for having me on this call. And I appreciate Mr. Stanek as well for being a co-panelist with me. And last but not least, the questions in the chat have been fantastic. Thank you all for your engagement and for your attention to this issue. So what I'm going to be covering is a lot of the things that we've already been discussing since we've been on the call, which is the fact that the real crisis that we're seeing here in Maryland is our utility prices, not necessarily our supply and demand energy situation. And I'll break this down by using my own Pepco bill. I'm also a Pepco customer to explain some things. Just as Mr. Stanek showed a Pepco bill on the screen, I'll do the same. And I'll walk through the problems that we're seeing, but also some potential solutions. I see everybody asking about that in the Q&A. So to begin, those RTO region-wide load forecasts are very dramatic and very startling. And when we look across the entire 13 states, including the District of Columbia region, we do see an increase in summer peak and winter peak over the next few decades. But the interesting thing is when we look at our area in Maryland, we don't see as much of an increase in forecasted load. And so the public and also legislators have to keep that in mind as we're building out the grid for Maryland's future. And so this slide right here is really important because it lets us know who are the stakeholders involved in the conversation we're having and how do they relate to each other. So Mr. Stanek already shared a lot about PJM and its functions. And it's over here. The only entity that oversees PJM is the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. And over here is the Maryland General Assembly, who works in partnership with the Public Service Commission to regulate all of the utility companies. And one thing I want you to recognize when you look at this chart of all the utility companies in Maryland, the ones in red are investor-owned utilities, with BG&E, Pepco, and Delmarva Power and Light being the Exelon-owned utilities. So they all have the same parent company. And the blue utilities down here at the bottom are actually cooperatives. So they're not owned by investors or other stakeholders. They're owned either by a certain geographic area or cooperatives in that they allow shares to be sold to the community, things like that. And last but not least, I wanted to point out down here at the bottom is our captive customer base, because we know that utility companies do not operate like businesses, because when you move into a home or when you buy a small business, you are automatically signed up for whatever utility serves that area. And so we don't get to choose our utility companies, and they are not exposed to the same principles as a normal business. And with that being said, we also have to realize that investor-owned utilities, even though they have captive customer bases, they are still profit maximizers like other businesses, because they do have to get that return on investment for their investors. So how do they get that return on investment? The primary way that utility companies make money, especially investor-owned utility companies, is with capital expenditures. So when they build expensive, large projects such as the poles, pipes, and wires that bring the energy to us, they're able to recuperate that money on our utility bills, but they also get an additional percentage that they get to keep as profit. And the PSC oversees that rate, how much they're able to keep as profit. But the relationship of that is not necessarily an approval process, because historically the PSC has not denied how much they requested as far as profits and plans. So now introduction to utility bills, and Mr. Stanek reviewed this as well, so I probably won't have to linger here too long. So utility bills have three types of charges. Supply charges, and this is the graphic that we all see on our Pepco bills. On my bill, the supply charge was a little bit more than the 50% that we saw on the previous bill. And we know that supply, just as he stated, is primarily captures transmissions costs and also a capacity market auction cost. And then we have the delivery or distribution charges, which is primarily going to the utility. And then there are some fixed charges as well. And as we've already discussed, many of the charges on the utility bill are multiplied your usage times whatever the associated rate is. And that is important. I mean, one of the clearest ways, Chesapeake Climate Action Network is an organization that advocates for clean energy and climate action. And one of the clearest ways that we see climate change becoming a part of the utility conversation is we are having increased usage because of colder cold days and hotter hot days. And that does make us run our air conditioners a little bit more and run our heat a little bit more in the winter. And so when we have that increased usage, you can really feel the effects of higher rates. So just sticking on the distribution or delivery side of the utility bill for a moment, distribution rates have steadily and intentionally been going up over time. especially for the Exelon-owned utilities. You've been seeing that between 2010, which is around the time that they were acquired by Exelon, until 2025, the rates have been going up more and more. And I have highlighted here what's going on in the PEPCO territory, because I know most people on this call are in the PEPCO territory. You see that PEPCO has had the highest yearly average increase in rate. And what is really interesting to me is, in contrast, Potomac Edison here at the top, their rate barely went up over 1 cent during this time from 2010 to 2025. So they had their distribution rate was 1.7 cents total, and now it is just 2.3 cents. And the interesting thing about this, and I'll speak a little bit about resources at the end of this presentation, but the Office of People's Counsel, out of anyone that you hear from about energy, the energy conversation in Maryland, they're the only entity, the only agency that's in charge of protecting ratepayers and revealing what's really going on in our energy system. And their reports say that even though the distribution rates, the delivery rates from utility companies, specifically the Exelon-owned utilities, have been going up over time, we are not seeing greater reliability or system resilience because of these increased rates. So now let's move over to the supply side drivers of the increases. You know, we are just dealing with this blue side, and now we're going to deal with the purple. And so the supply side, as we continue to reiterate, which we can't reiterate enough if you all came to this call with a high utility bill and this is your first time getting exposed to this information. The supply side is primarily capturing transmission costs, capacity market auction costs, and some other costs. And on my bill, on this month that I'm sharing, this $57 was the largest singular line item on the bill. And a lot of the reason that the supply side of the bill is going up is because of what's going on in the stakeholder process at PJM. And I wish I had included that image that Mr. Stanek included in his slide, because one thing I always share about PJM is they do have a side of the organization that is full of dedicated professionals that do their best to get us the right amount of energy in the right way every day. And they do a great job. You know, we do not have a large number of outages. We are overall getting the services that we need from our regional transmission organization. But what we're looking at here is the entities that are involved in the stakeholder process. And so that's outside of the day-to-day operations. It's more about how they make decisions at PJM. And you'll see that primarily who's involved in making the overarching decisions that determine things like our capacity market auction costs. It's the generation owners, so the people that own the power plants, the transmission owners, the people that own the transmission lines, other suppliers, so businesses that also are, you know, getting money from the selling of energy, electric distributors, so that's the utility companies, and consumer advocates only have a little sliver of this end-use customer piece of the stakeholder pie. And so what has been true since about 2 capacity market auctions ago is that PJM stakeholder process has been really costly for Marylanders. Currently, about 30% of the supply costs on a utility bill are due to issues with how PJM plans for and manages our electric grid. And to enumerate some of the problems that we're seeing is, one, they're not connecting new energy projects quickly enough. So even though where I started in this PowerPoint was the fact that our load forecast is not that steep, However, just as Mr. Stanek was saying, we do have some power plants that are retiring because they're old and their technology is outdated. They have given us notice that they wanted to retire, but there's this thing called the interconnection queue, which is the line that energy projects get in order to receive a bill to see if they can even build the project. And that line has been closed down for multiple years. Now, they have been accepting new applications to get in the line, but they haven't been processing those applications in a speed that will allow us to have the energy we need. And not only the energy we need, but also the lowest cost energy on our grid, because we know that solar, battery storage, and land-based wind are the cheapest energy that you can put on the grid. Now, another thing, and I'll get this more into this in the next slide, some of the rules that we're using to determine how much we pay for energy on the supply side of our bills are antiquated and really expensive for ratepayers. And then last but not least, data center forecasts are skewing supply and demand projections. And the reason I have that bullet point is because this is not actually something that PJM oversees, but data centers have been shopping around for locations, and we don't have a good way to hold them accountable for making bids in multiple states. So even though, and I answered this question in the chat a while ago, somebody said, oh, what percentage is the load forecast, like electric cars and electric buildings versus data centers? Well, data centers make up about 90% of the load forecast, 30 gigawatts, and the other side is only about 2 gigawatts. But what they've been doing is going around to different states and going around to different sites and saying they want to build. And if we're not having any accountability, we can be double counting or even triple counting, potentially in some cases, those potential large load centers. So I'm not going to spend too much time right here because it's a long story, and I'll actually put a podcast link in the chat to explain this story a little bit better. But there's a situation going on in the BG&E territory that really explains and spotlights some of these challenges that I just stated. And that's the situation that's going on with the Brandon Shores and Wagner power plants. So those power plants wanted to shut down because they're uneconomic. Also, they're very polluting and the technology hasn't advanced. And instead of those power plants shutting down, what the PJM stakeholder process offered is what's called an RMR, also known as Reliability Must Run Agreement. So the RMR is literally the theory behind it is that we can pay them extra to stay online until we have the energy we need for them to close down. Well, not the most recent capacity market auction, but the capacity market auction before that, which again is the market we use to ensure that we have energy for the future. The way that market was run, the Brandon Shores and Wagner power plants were not able to bid into the auction. And so what this created was a situation where the clearing price of the capacity market auction went up almost 900%. And it's a little bit in the weeds to explain the unit that's connected to these prices. But think about anything. If the price of eggs went up that steeply, if the price of gasoline for your gas tank went up that steeply, if the price of your laptop went up that steeply, clearly that is alarming. But again, the reason that the price went up so steeply is not because of a situation that's actually occurring in the world. It's because of rules not allowing that power plant to put forth its energy, even though we're paying for it to stay online. And the interesting thing about that, one metaphor I use is it's just like, the flip phones and Nokia phones that we had in the early 2000s. it would be like having one of those in your hand, and instead of taking it to the Apple store and trading it for an iPhone, they tell you, no, keep that phone, and we're going to increase your bill for you to keep that. So in summary, utility bills are going up on both sides of the ledger, on the delivery side and on the supply side. And this is a chart from Office of People's Counsel, which I already shared is the ratepayer advocate we have. They're one of the best Office of People's Counsels in the entire United States. And it shows how utility bills have been going up and down over time. The light blue, I believe, hold up, I apologize. I'm trying to see my key. The light blue, I believe, is the delivery side, and the dark blue is the supply side. And we see with both sides of the bill increasing, we are having the highest utility bills that we've seen since 2008. So, of course, we're here because we want to know about solutions. Some false solutions to this situation are overbuilding on new gas plants. And really, that's something they're wrestling with in Virginia. But Virginia is a slightly different context to it than us. So I won't talk about that too much. But we don't want to focus on building new gas plants as the way to solve these problems, because we already said a lot of these problems are rules. A lot of these problems are because we're not adding the energy that's available to the grid. And gas plants are really slow to build. They're polluting. They're expensive. But some real solutions are building clean energy, especially battery storage projects, because they're some of the quickest projects that we can add to the grid with the highest megawatts. But also solar projects, because those are the cheapest electrons you can put on the grid. Then also ensuring that these clean energy projects are getting through the PJM process, that line I was telling you about earlier, called the queue, so that when they want to be built, they'll actually get out of that line in a reasonable fashion, that their financial situation will still work out. Then also requiring data centers to be good neighbors. You know, Mr. Stanek and I both pointed out that the data center load forecast is one of the things that's driving up utility rates, holding utility companies accountable, and also visionary leadership. Actually, at the end of this year, the CEO of PJM is stepping down, and there's really an opportunity to elect someone who understands the context that we're in, understand the goals of the different states, and operates accordingly to ensure that we're able to start building the clean energy future we need. And so with that, I'll just say two more things. One, resources, because I'm sure a lot of people on this call came because you have a high utility bill in hand. If you're having trouble paying your utility bill, the best thing to do is go to myohipstatus.org and apply for Office of Home Energy Programs. Those are some grants and programs that we have in the state to protect from your utility bill, your utility service getting shut off, to help you catch up, etc. Then also the Empower Maryland program, as someone indicated in the chat, that actually is one of the line items on our bill. We all pay into the Empower program. It is one of the best programs that we have to ensure that we're, instead of building new infrastructure to deliver more electrons, that we're making sure that we're using as least amount of power as possible, because the cheapest electrons are the ones you don't use. And then last but not least, you know, we have a lot of engaged, smart, attentive people on this call. And if you're ever looking for information to help you understand what's going on, I encourage you to visit opc.maryland.gov. They have the best information about what's happening with our utilities, our utility rates, PJM. They even put out an email just today that was some updated information on this exact conversation. And then the last thing I want to show you is this. It is true that Pennsylvania is the powerhouse of PJM, but the reality is most states in the PJM footprint are net importers and not net exporters. And what's really interesting is even though Maryland is a very small state, we're small but mighty. And we import electricity because it is cheaper for ratepayers that sometimes as they're moving electricity around the grid, if Pennsylvania is producing some cheap electrons, we should bring those into the state instead of creating all of our own electricity. But I'll put a link in the chat, an OPC report. And a lot of the times on the hottest hot days and the coldest cold days, we produce more than 60% of our electricity because we have the ability to do that. And even sometimes when it's not a stressed out grid, we export occasionally. So we do have the ability to produce more than 40% of our electricity at any given time, but we just choose to bring energy in because it's cheaper. It's the same way like we do with food. We could produce all of our turmeric or ginger or apples that we want in the state, but we can get cheaper apples from other places. All right, I'll stop there.
Thank you so much for this. And I will say, I'm pretty sure Pepco and all those utilities are squirming in their seat. And it is no worries. We are going to have another one of these in January where we will hear from the utilities companies. But I'm sure everyone learned quite a bit from the presentation today. I just want to ask a couple of follow-up questions so that people could understand. So when you talked about, so do you know, because many people, and do you know this, does solar actually, is there any way that you know that a data center is solely, and that Jason, maybe we could bring you on too? But let's turn Jason on so that we could bring him on so that we could just ask all these follow-up questions to both of you. Do you all know any situation where a data center is solely powered by solar?
No, there's no instances in the United States where a data center, their needs are so tremendous that no solar array right now without a large battery associated with it could supply the needs of a large hyperscaler.
Okay. Okay. And of course that's helpful because I know that that is becoming an issue. And Brittany, if you had to go into what would be the most solid way to help people lower their bills, Jason would say it's power generation, right? Is that right, Jason?
Bringing on new supply of power generation will have an effect. Yes.
Okay. And Brittany, what will be your response to that? What would be the way to lower the bills? Because that's what we could talk about everything, but that's what I want to know. How do I get my bill to get lower? Like that is the consistent question.
That's a great question. And I'm going to put a link in the chat to sign up with CCAN's email list because we talk about this all the time. I would say on the household scale, the best way to lower your energy bill is to do energy efficiency and weatherization, especially for us in Maryland because some of our homes are a lot older. If you're creating heat, like right now today, it's very cold and it's escaping through your windows, it's escaping through the cracks underneath your door, or it's escaping out of your attic, that's going to keep your bill really high. And the Empower program offers the ability to weatherize for cheap or sometimes for free. They'll also check up on your HVAC system to make sure it's the most efficient system as possible. But on a grid scale, I would say, I mean, there's a lot that can be done with changing the rules. Like I was stating in my slideshow, I think holding the utilities accountable to be sure that their rates are as low as possible. And then also participating in the PJM processes to make sure they're doing things that are protective of ratepayers is important as well. And one more thing that I'll say to that, we've actually made a lot of progress. So last year, the Next Generation Energy Act passed, and it was the legislative leadership energy package. And some of the provisions in there really will do a lot to lower bills or at least ensure that rates don't continue to go up. For example, they said when utility companies are putting forth what's called a multi-year rate plan. So that's a plan when they try to increase rates, they said they need to demonstrate customer benefit. And so with the PSC, who I showed in the chart, with them having that renewed language, they might start denying these plans or looking at these plans more carefully to ensure that utility companies, their rates are reasonable. And another, and Mr. Stanek, you might speak to this more than I can, but PJM is working on something right now related to these load growth based on data centers. It's called the Critical Issue Fast Path. And right now, as far as I know, Mr. Stanek will have a better sense, but they haven't agreed on anything yet, even though there are some proposals that really do a lot to protect ratepayers. So things are moving, and we have to stay clued in to make sure that what shakes out at the end of things is positive for ratepayers.
There is a lot of movement going on, as Ms. Baker just noted. But to answer your first question, how do customers immediately realize some relief? I would agree with Ms. Baker. Take advantage of energy efficiency. Take a look at your thermostat. Make adjustments there if necessary. She mentioned the Empower program. Everybody pays for that. You'll see a line item on your Pepco bill, and it's been increasing in recent years. You pay for it whether or not you seek out the benefits for it. So it's in your interest to check with Pepco, to check with the offerings that are available for discounted or reduced energy efficiency programs, home audits, where they'll send professionals to your homes. So that's one way you could take advantage and recoup some of the money, because it's your money. You're paying for it, whether you like it or not. You might as well reap the benefits.
Yes, and I think people should understand that is that with Empower, when you get those things, and then maybe we'll have Pepco and BGE talk about them because they do send things. When you get those energy efficiency offers to come in your home and give you energy efficiency programs, those are usually paid for by Empower. But so you might think, ooh, free, but it's not free. You paid for it already. And it's on your bill. And I had to actually look when someone told me that, I had to actually look, and I said, oh my God, it is on your bill. So you do pay Empower monthly, into Empower a monthly. So please take advantage of it. So lastly, the discussion about the ending of the coal plant. So is that now, this is something now, Jason, can you go back of how, or you, Jason or Brittany, however, how we got to that point where we're closing down coal plants? And I do want to note that many environmentalists, and some are on this call, we do thank them for their work, were helpful in pushing for for us to leave coal. But the goods and bads of that, what has the goods is, of course, bringing down addressing greenhouse gas emissions, but it could have, we are looking at where we are now. So can you go into how that impacted us by closing down the coal plants?
Yeah, I'm happy to speak to that.
Okay.
It is interesting when people think about transitioning away from coal. They also often think about environmentalists. And even though we do love it, I won't lie, it is a positive development. We're not the reason that the coal plants are closing down. Actually, there's a quote from President Obama that said, you can build a coal plant if you want, you just won't make any money. And it really is, because coal plants are just an outdated technology. And across the nation, those plants are closing down, no matter what the greenhouse gas and environmental priorities are in the state. And actually, that reminds me of earlier in this call, you asked, which state has the most clean energy? Texas. Because clean energy brings on the cheap electrons, battery storage provides more grid flexibility. The technology of energy is just evolving. And so when it comes to that coal plant, the pros are reducing greenhouse gas emissions, updating to the newest technology, reducing localized air pollution, helping Black and Brown communities to be restored in terms of public health attainment. But also, the cons that we're seeing are not from the plants closing down, but from poor planning related to the plants closing down. I shared earlier about how that plant wanted to close down, and instead we offered them a reliability must run agreement. which cost Marylanders hundreds of millions of dollars, and we're paying that now on our utility bills. But even with that happening, and with the associated capacity market auction increases from that, an additional thing that's happening, BG&E is overseeing a process of creating a transmission line to replace the energy that plant created. And that transmission line initially cost Marylanders $740 million, but that cost has ballooned to $1.5 billion. Now we need that line so the plant can shut down, but it's just little things like that, like lack of oversight, lack of accountability, that's making the replacement of that plant very expensive, instead of simply, shutting it down, maybe putting some battery storage projects there and quickly connecting that battery storage to the grid.
Thank you. Jason, can you answer to that too? Because I know that we've closed one, but we haven't opened up another. Can you just touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, well, the state obviously has some very aggressive goals for decarbonization and movement towards 100% clean and renewable energy. And to be clear, PJM is a transmission planner. We don't have any authority to own or direct the development of generating resources. And we've seen coal resources decline in the state to the point where we only really have one unit left, and that's the Brandon Shores unit that Ms. Baker referenced earlier. The problem is when you remove large quantities of what we call baseload power, right? These are the big power plants, and you don't have much left. That's when you have to import. And if you take a look at every single day of last year, there was not a single day where Maryland exported 1 little watt of power. We imported every 365 days. So this power crunch is real. When we say that we could see a voltage collapse as early as the summer of 2027, we're not Chicken Little. We're not running around saying the sky is falling without evidence. We see that the situation in Maryland, the energy infrastructure, is getting more challenging by the day.
Thank you so much. And then lastly, I will say this, as we're looking at the big picture of the future, we're trying to make sure that we catch get people to understand what's going on. I would say for both of you, what are the solutions that you are, just solidify some of what you talked about solution. I will start with you, Jason. I know the big one is power generation. Is there a point where let's just say a big supercomputer data center comes up, does PJM have the authority to tell some jurisdiction, no, it can't come on the grid?
No, we don't have that authority. We're not a government body. We're a nonprofit entity, fully regulated by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission there. So it's a difficult position because we don't make policy at PJM. Everything that we do is we have somebody looking over our shoulder and either approving or denying those requests. But what we do need to do is come together, legislators at all levels, from governors to county officials, our stakeholders, our advocates, our activists who participate in the PJM process. Proud to announce that it's a very public and transparent process. We have over 400 meetings a year that residents and constituents do participate in. But we need these ideas to get to the best solution that not only maintains reliability 24/7, but also is mindful of environmental and decarbonization efforts, as well as affordability, which is now quickly, for elected officials, becoming the top issue. Because your constituents are not calling about reliability problems on Pepco's grid because the lights are on 24/7, with the exception of maybe a storm or a hurricane that comes by every couple of years. But if and when there are service disruptions, all of a sudden you'll be getting different phone calls from your constituents saying, my power's out, not necessarily my Pepco bill is too high.
Okay, well, thank you so much for that. And then turning it over to Brittany, any thoughts of what the future is? And you did highlight some of that in your presentation, but just to recap, quick recap.
Sure. My quick recap. First, I'll start with I agree with Mr. Stanek that the hugest issue we're seeing is the affordability issue. And I say this all the time because I really believe in people first climate action. And so I really do go to various centers across the state to help get people connected to utility assistance. And yes, sometimes the power goes out, in our homes. Maybe it's out for a couple of hours. But there are people I've talked to with $6,000 BG&E bills who've had their service cut off for 6 months. And so the reliability issue is with high utility bills. And so I look forward to a future where clean energy is connected to the grid swiftly, and battery storage is deployed across the state for that flexibility. Whatever the current power plants that we have now, a lot of them are gas. They can charge up those batteries. And then at times of peak demand, those electrons can go out to the grid. So they are the bridge to the clean energy future. Because just as Mr. Stanek said, I mean, an easy reference point is 1 gigawatt is about the size of a power plant. We have offshore wind resources off the Delmarva Peninsula about equivalent to 8 power plants worth of energy. But it is going to take some commitment, a little bit of defense, and some patience to get all that energy online. And so while we're waiting for that to come online, we can build battery storage. And we can reform the rules that are really penalizing ratepayers for the slow walking of clean energy projects by entities that we don't have any control over.
Thank you all so much for this. This is a great presentation for both of you. We get our hand of applause. We know that most of the questions were answered, but we will be sending a recap. Can each of you just state how people can get in touch with you? And I think we would have to put in Saudi and Fatmata, if you could put what they, I don't know if everyone can see what was sent out at the webinar chat. If you all could see it, that's good. Brittany has our information. And oh, this is sent to host and panelists. So it says to everyone. Okay, you have it. And then and Jason, if you could put your information in the chat so people can get contact you directly to hear back from you all. So I guess the last thing that I would say, should people be open to opening a power plant or battery storage in their community?
I would hope so. We see a lot of NIMBYism, and NIMBYism has converted to another acronym called bananas: build absolutely nothing anywhere near anybody. In order for us to continue as a modern society, and we all have our phones and iPads and laptops, we recognize we're contributing to this. If you have a phone and you're using it, you are effectively building a data center somewhere. So we'll recognize that nobody wants infrastructure in their backyard, but we need to host it somewhere.
Yeah, and I would say something very similar, actually. I really like that acronym bananas. I'm going to have to use that. And I would also say, Black and brown people have historically carried the burden of the energy grid by citing dirty, expensive, polluting power plants in our communities. And so now is the time, in order for there to be an equitable clean energy build out, and because clean energy in general does need a larger footprint than a fossil plant, we do have to all be open to the clean energy resources. But fortunately, it's not polluting our air, it's not polluting our water, and we can try to build plants that look really nice in our communities. And as we build out a future of battery storage, onshore wind, solar, community solar. I know we were talking in the chat about people whose roofs might not be appropriate for residential solar. You can sign up for a community solar subscription and then eventually get our offshore wind. We will have and transmission lines to move energy from place to place. We will have more energy infrastructure around us, but it won't be harming us.
Right. Well, thank you all so much, everybody, for coming on. I hope you learned something, because I learned a lot. Thanking both these panelists. definitely thank you, Brittany. Very interesting breaking everything down. And thank you to Jason for letting us know what's happening. Because for many of us, I would say, like I said before I sat in this position, I really did not know all the things that were at play for our energy bill, and really had to be forced to pay attention when many of the people on this call who are my residents started calling, complaining about high electricity bills. So thank you so much. I hope you all learned a lot, and this will be the first of many series. We are going to have one next month on with the utility companies, and you will be hearing, and we will ask them not only about the distribution rates and the increased rates over time, but we will also ask them about these energy efficiency programs that they have been putting at your door. I think I got one 10 years ago. 10 years ago from Pepco. I did have them come in my house and do everything, and now my bills are low because of that. So it really made a difference, and I would not, and I almost mistakenly elected to do it. So it was something that opened my eyes. And now that these bills are gone up, my bill hasn't gone up as much because of the fact that I do not only have solar panels, um, and I have solar panels, and I do have all of the different gadgets that I got that I thought were freebies. And I just learned that I've been paying for it every month. All right. Well, thank you all so much. And you all, everyone, have a great night.